To tonight's presentation, we're going to Q&A the test prep expert herself. Welcome, Marissa. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. All right. So I am Andy Lockwood from Lockwood College Prep, and Marissa is our head tutor and chief cook and bottle washer at Lockwood Test Prep. And we're going to be talking tonight. It's we're doing this on the 19th of December. And we're gearing up for our spring ACT and SAT courses. And I thought it would be fun to go through some of the recent results of our clients, our seniors, class of 2019 kids who have started to hear back from their early decision schools. And we had a couple of great results of kids who, either worked with Marissa exclusively or worked with her and with me on the college advising and applications and essays and all that type of stuff. So we had one, I won't mention her name, but we had one client who she hit her top ACT score after, she and she's going to Tufts University. She studied forever with you. It seems like. She was such a hard worker. What? Say that again?
I think it was about a full calendar year.
I actually, I was looking, it was longer than that. And what I want to point out to anyone is who's watching this, whether it's live with us or on replay. Actually, if you're watching, just check in with us. I forgot to do this, just so you can let us know that you can hear us okay. Say hi in chat. I'm just going to turn to my other monitor here. And all right, good. So Aneen, you've already asked a question. So good. So we're gonna be taking questions because this is the Ask the Test Prep Expert. Just so it seems like you can hear us. If you're with us live, please introduce yourself. Say your name and where you're from. That's always fun because not everyone is local. Sometimes we get people from like Serbia and other random places. So. Good. So Julie has a question. All right, good. So I see the question starting to come in. All right, good. So we're going to be talking about just sort of tips, and then at the end we're going to give an offer with a discount for our courses that are coming up. We also offer tutoring on a sort of a case-by-case basis when Marissa has time for that. Hello to Lawrence from Arlington, Massachusetts. Arlington, which is the stop right after Boylston on the Green Line. Downtown, but Arlington, Mass is further out. So, all right, good. So you guys can hear us. Okay. So the thing about the student whose name I'm not going to use so I don't embarrass her, who it was more than a year that she worked with us, is that she was so tenacious, I think, about her preparation. She was so coachable. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, she was never deterred. In the beginning, her progress was very slow. It took her a long time to kind of like get to that point where things started clicking. And she took that, I don't know how many times she took it, maybe 6 times. And she was steadily going up every time, but it was like 24, then 25, then 26. And she eventually hit her 31.
Yeah.
So, she's a very memorable student because she really, really kept trying, even when her practice scores sometimes weren't reflecting what they should have.
I told her when her mom texted me a couple of days ago after she got the news about Tufts, was that, and I said this all along to her. I was like, look, your grades and your scores are not in the slam dunk to get in category. She was at the low end of the range, but everything else about her extracurriculars, which we certainly helped her, craft, but more importantly, her work ethic. The amount of work that she put in by starting early and working very hard on the tutoring and the classes, that was just sort of symptomatic of her overall, just her character. And yeah. I think that really shone through not only on the applications but on her results. A lot of kids, I find they know they have to do this stuff. They know that they're competing at top schools with kids who have started test prep even earlier than 10th grade in some cases. But a lot of kids, they'll make excuses. They'll be sometimes they're legitimate, but there's today's kids are so overscheduled with rehearsals and practices and extracurriculars. It's very hard to find the time start test prep. But when do you think the optimal time is to actually get serious about test prep?
For most students, I would say the summer before the junior year.
So end of 10th grade leading into 11th grade.
Yes.
Right.
And if we could just touch back on a topic you just mentioned for a moment, about the student that you just mentioned, one of the notable things about her was that she did cut back on the extracurriculars during the junior year, so she could concentrate on prepping for the ACT. So I do think that is something that people should consider, especially if those extracurriculars aren't going to directly get you some sort of scholarship offer. Not that you should drop everything, but ease up a little bit on the time-consuming extracurriculars.
Well, that's actually a very good point, because I have a because we coach a lot of kids through that whole sort of process of positioning themselves to get in, and what you said makes a lot of sense from another standpoint. A lot of kids are under the misconception that they have to do 25 extracurricular activities. But I can tell you firsthand, and I can tell you on behalf of the 5 former admissions officers that work for us, that also coach our kids. And again, from this last cycle, it's not really about quantity. It's about the quality. It's about going deep on certain extracurriculars. So this student in particular that we're talking about, but not naming out of discretion, she went really deep. She was a business major. She wanted to go in that direction. So she and we helped her craft her activities and her resume with a few deep type of activities, and that won the day. By the way, I had another guy just recently who was not a test prep client, but he was number 3 or number 2 in his class at a very well-known parochial school here in Long Island. And a lot of kids at that school, they don't have a ton of extracurriculars because they spend so much time commuting back and forth, so they don't have the same time the kids who don't have that time constraint have to deal with. And he went also very deep on his handful of extracurriculars, and he even taught himself a couple of languages and stuff. So he ended up getting into Wharton.
Good for him.
It's not about breadth; it's about depth.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
But back to your question, I do think it's ideal to start in the summer before your junior year, so you can get acquainted with the test during a time period where you're not bombarded with schoolwork and tons of extracurriculars. And that also gives you a nice long stretch to take potential tests. Now, of course, not everybody is going to take 6 tests like the person we mentioned before, but it's good to have that option for a couple of reasons. Maybe you don't hit the score that you want. Maybe you need more experience with the test, or maybe something happens and there's a snowstorm, or you break your leg, or you get ill. Also psychologically, I think.
Break your leg, yeah. You can still take a test with a broken leg.
That's true. I had a student who just took the test, and he had like a sinus infection and like strep throat or something, and his score was, much lower than it should have been. So, sometimes you do get sick, especially with the stress associated with studying. And psychologically, I think it's not good to have the pressure if you start in June, or God forbid, I've had people start in September of their senior year, knowing that, I have 1 or 2 chances to do this is not good.
It's like playing a sport. The best athletes perform their best when they're prepared and relaxed, not clenched. Yeah. By the way, we have some kids who signed up for our mock diagnostic this weekend who are in 10th grade, and this is they're going to be entering the second half of their 10th grade year, so that's on the early side. But how do you feel about that?
I think it's good to start at least prepping at that point, because the summer is only 6 months away. So it's good to get your feet wet. Some people do start at the end of 10th grade. I know your daughter started.
Yeah, she's different. That's because it's a family business, yeah.
Now I lost track of what I was going to say.
Well, just in terms of starting, I mean, sometimes people are like, well, we haven't had all the math yet. The PSAT was low. Like, what do you think? Was it a waste of time? That type of stuff.
I mean, it's true that sometimes all of the math hasn't been hit yet, but I still think it's good to start at least by spring of your junior year. I don't mean to panic people who have juniors now. This is still a really good time to start. I just think starting in the summer is just a more relaxed way to do it. But starting now, You've got, if the SAT, you can have March, May, June. The ACT, you've got February, April, and June to take those tests. So you still have a lot of time to start. This is also a good time to start. But I do have a question for you. I did have somebody whose student goes to, I forgot the school, it was another parochial school, and they highly recommend against starting the tests earlier than, I think it was May. Do you know why they would do that?
Oh yeah, no, I hear that all the time.
Okay.
So I'm going to answer that question. If you're just joining us, and I see a lot of questions starting to come in, I'm going to be going through these questions in a few minutes once we get past our comments that we wanted to get out. So feel free to pop your questions in on chat. It would be really helpful if you see on your chat bar, I'm just looking off screen here. If you toggle on the far right, there's like these 3 dots to ask a question as opposed to chat. That'll flag it. That'll make it easier for me to flag it, so I can ask Marissa the question. So parochial schools in general, I mean, it was never in the cards for our kids since we're Jewish to go to them, but I really love them. Shamnat is probably the hardest one around here. Kellenberg, St. Anthony's, and so forth. But I love them for many reasons, mostly because of the character development and the rigor for a lot of kids. But where they really fall short, and of course I have a professional bias here, so if you're listening, put that in the proper context. They really fall short in the college advising, college preparatory type of advice, because most of the parochial schools, and this is also true about most public schools, they don't really have serious college conversations with kids until 11th grade at some point. And the problem with that is you start creating the body of work that's ultimately going to be judged by a admissions officer as soon as your foot hits the floor in 9th grade. So a lot of stuff gets kind of blown off until you realize it's too late. I wish I had known this, 2 years ago. Same thing with the test prep. When a lot of times the Catholic schools and other schools will say, you don't have to worry about it till spring, to the end of your junior year. The problem with that is you're putting all this pressure on yourself. Hardly anyone in affluent areas like where we are in the North Shore of Long Island is one and done. They take the test once and they're done. Most kids applying to competitive schools, how many times do they take it? At least 3, if not 4 or 5, right?
Yeah, and I recommend my students bare minimum twice, even if you've got a 34, because sometimes you just click with the test better, or you're in a better state of mind that day. You can always possibly get better. So I would never take it once unless, of course, your score was a 36 or a 1600.
Well, it also depends on where you're applying, right? So I had a meeting last weekend with a kid who's being recruited to an Ivy League school for football, and he took the test once and he got like a 14 something, which was great. And I said, what do you think about taking it again? He goes, no, I'm done. I said, well, Ivy League schools, the higher you do, the better, because they have this academic index weighting system, which is really the short of it is that each team has to have kind of a certain average GPA and test scores, whether it's ACT or SAT. And that was done in the 60s to prevent ringers from being recruited to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton and all that. So most of the time, I've seen this with all the athletes that come through our doors, the coaches want the kids to take it 2 or 3 times just so they can, that allows them more leeway at the lower end to recruit other, better athletes who tend not to be as gifted academically. So he didn't realize that. He was thinking he was done. He didn't know anything, by the way, about the subject tests. Most Ivy Leagues require at least 2 subject tests. So there's a lot of information that gets out there too late, and he was just hearing it randomly because he came into my office on the weekend. It's not coming from the schools. So the earlier you start, the better. I wouldn't really worry about not having all of the perfect amount of content, because what you're doing, even if you start prepping in 10th grade or earlier, like my freaky daughter, is that you're developing, it's like a sport. You're developing the test prep muscles, and the more repetition you get in, the better. So if you're like a swimmer like Michael Phelps or a basketball player like LeBron James or whatever, the more you practice, the more you're going to be ready on game day. And I don't know, I mean, when you say the bare minimum is 2, I really don't know anyone very few people who took it only twice.
That's the barest minimum.
Yeah.
That's for people who are set on only taking it once. They please take it at least twice.
Okay.
You did mention subject tests, which is another point. in getting started earlier with the SAT, especially if you're taking the SAT, because the subject tests are usually given on the same day. Well, they're always on the same day as the SAT, although
Right.
they're not on every SAT date. So it's an either or situation. You can't take a subject test and the SAT at the same session. So that's another thing to consider. Usually subject tests are better taken toward the end of the year, since you'll be hopefully finishing up that subject in school.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a
People
lot
take them a couple in one day. They're only an hour each.
Yeah, you could take 3, I think, in one day.
Yeah. Okay, so what about SAT versus ACT? Like, what do you sometimes people ask, I'm sure they ask you too, is one easier than the other? What do you recommend? Like, just talk about that in general. And then I want to talk to you about how you figure that out which way a kid should go. So it's a 2-part question.
Just in very general terms, the SAT is a slower exam. So if somebody is a slow thinker, a slow reader, sometimes the SAT is a better choice. But that said, the SAT, I find, also has more difficult questions. The reading is more difficult and the math is more difficult. So if somebody is really weak in math, then they might lean more toward the ACT. On the flip side, the ACT is kind of shockingly fast for a lot of people. I have people sit down for our diagnostic, and I give them a warning in the beginning of it that this is really fast-paced, so they're not surprised, but they're still very surprised at how fast it goes. But if somebody is a faster reader and they can handle thinking quickly, the ACT is usually a better test. If you have a student who is likely to be given extra time on the test, almost always the ACT is a better choice for them, because that extra time is more of a benefit, in my experience, on the ACT. But just as a reminder, everybody needs to get approval from the ACT. It's not like an automatic thing. If you're getting accommodations in school, that you'll also get it on the test, although it is likely that you will.
Is it easier to get accommodations from the College Board for the SAT versus the ACT, or is it about the same?
I don't think I know enough to answer that. I'm not
sure.
sure.
Something up like you do in class. Yeah, I found the rumor, I don't know if it's true, is that the SAT is giving accommodations more freely because they lost a lot of market share to the ACT, and they're doing all this stuff.
I've heard rumors, but I just, in my experience, I couldn't really say.
Yeah.
I think you have to apply to both of them on your own.
You definitely do. Yeah.
With the ACT now, you have to apply through the school as well. So it can be really complicated. If you are looking to get extended time, go tomorrow and get the ball rolling, because it can take time. And a lot of people just mistakenly think that they'll automatically get it. And I had that happen to a student, and then he found out he got the letter of rejection a couple of days before the test. And that did not work out well at all.
Yeah, not really the right frame of mind. So so you need to use extended time to qualify for extended time, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. So how do people choose which tests to take in general, and what do you recommend if it's something different than the way people choose normally, how to pick one over the other?
In general, I think people just decide for random reasons. Like, a lot of people sign their kids up for the SAT because they grew up on one of the coasts and that's the test that they took. Right. Other people sign up for the ACT because that's what most people in their school are doing, or that's what their friends are doing.
Yes.
That's not a good way to make your decision.
How about the whole thing about the ACT has a science section? I'm not good at science, so I shouldn't take that.
Yeah, that's not a good reason, because it's not really testing science knowledge. 80-90% of that section is testing reading comprehension and the ability to like process and analyze information and read charts and such. You can take that whole section without really having taken any science classes at all. Like, if you didn't take physics, it's okay. You can still get all the physics problems correct. There are a couple of general knowledge questions, but it's maybe 2 to 4 per test. It's not that much. So if you're a good reader, you might find the science is a good section for you.
So is it fair to say that it's not necessarily so much the science content, it's more reasoning? Is that not totally accurate?
It's more reasoning and reading and just analyzing.
So it's skills that can be developed.
Yes, exactly.
Got it. Okay. So I see some questions coming in. That's great. If you're just joining us, Andy Lockwood and Marissa Uneberg, we're talking about test prep, ACT versus SAT, and we've got some classes coming up in January. We're recording this at the end of December. We always have classes, but if you're watching this, before the sign up, we're going to give a special discount at the end. You ready for me to fire some questions at you from the audience? Lightning round.
Okay.
Okay.
Buzzer.
All right, here we go. Got to get the glasses on. All right. And good question. So if you have a question, please try to use the 3-dot toggle thing where it says ask a question on the right. That'll flag it for me. So Aneen, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Please discuss the essay portion of the SAT. Let me make one comment, then I'll turn it over to you. Most colleges don't care about the essay for either section. The ones that do, you don't have to really do that well because they are de-emphasized. So if you look at the average essay scores for Harvard and other Ivy League schools, and I'm telling you this nationally as well as our own clients who, this year had a couple kids get into Harvard, to Duke, Stanford, etc., Brown, same thing. Their essay scores were not so high. But what is your take on that, and how do you teach it?
Well, because it is not weighted very heavily, I don't spend a lot of time on the essay. I do in my classes and tutoring spend some time on it. The SAT essay is very different than most essays. It's different from the ACT essay in that you're not asked to give your opinion on a topic, but you're given a passage to read. Sometimes it's a speech from a politician, and you need to mostly sort of critique the way that person made the argument by saying like, oh, this person used a lot of evidence, or they used what's the word I'm thinking of, like emotional appeal or vivid imagery. And then you also have to say what the main point was, but you're not giving an opinion. So I've heard it's very similar to the AP language exam. Other than that, I mean, read some of the sample essays that the College Board gives so you have an idea of what they expect, but I wouldn't spend weeks or months prepping for the essay portion of the test.
So your classroom is right next to my office in our building, and I've heard you say this. I don't know if it was the SAT or the ACT essay component, but I heard you actually, and you can deny this if you want, but I heard you say, I thought that it's okay to lie on the essay.
That's for the ACT.
So you're not denying it. Okay. So what did you mean by that?
Well, the ACT essay is very different, where you are supposed to give an opinion on some sort of controversy. And they want you to write that essay in the style of almost like a research paper, where you make an assertion, but you're expected to back that up with evidence to support your assertion. But they know that you're not an expert on whatever random topic that they've come up with, and they obviously know that you won't be able to do any research during the test. So you can make up facts to support your assertions.
Did you tutor our president?
No,
I'm not supposed to say that. Okay. It was just so obvious. Like I felt like you were just opening the door.
I mean, I use the term fake news a lot now.
Yeah, it's hilarious. It's a great term. Yeah. So write it like a Facebook or a tweet, but a little longer. Okay.
Yes. Very long tweet.
Okay, so all right, next question, Julie. How much did that year cost in prep? I don't know if that was about Amanda or what, but we have different packages, and they're all on our website, lockwoodtestprep.com.
And it wasn't straight through. Like, she did take breaks after individual tests.
I'll say this one thing though. We're not one of these outfits that recommends like the 6-year plan. Like we don't have a lot of kids who do the 80-hour package. I mean, we have. I think the philosophy that you have, putting words in your mouth, is the greatest amount of results in the least amount of time. So when you hit the top of your range, you're done. So, and you're fast. I mean, I see that all the time.
I want happy clients. They give referrals. That's more beneficial to me than stringing it along and making people unhappy and having to mortgage their homes to afford tutoring.
We're not cheap. I mean, I'll say this: we're not cheap, but your job is really to get your clients to fire you.
And exactly. I mean, I lose a lot of students every
Yeah.
the test administration because they're happy with their scores.
Yeah.
Also, other companies I've worked for, they typically have one verbal tutor, one math tutor. So it's 2 hours in each subject every week. So it's really double the cost every week to go with a lot of other companies. I do everything in a single lesson. And I work with people with budgets. If they can't afford to have 2 hours a week of tutoring, sometimes we stretch it out and do every other week, and I help the kids do self-studying in the interim. So we can work it out. We can work with budgets.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's listen, your hourly rate somewhere in the twos, which is not the cheapest, and it's far from the most expensive. I was talking to a client the other day in the city who was paying $3.50 an hour, and they spent way more than the typical kid does with you. And then you have a client who you're working with by Skype who lives in New York City who is quoted $8.50 an hour. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're not anywhere near the top of the range, but I think we charge a fair price.
I interviewed with the company in Manhattan a few years back, and I was telling her how I try to get results very quickly. And she's like, no, don't do that.
The hiring manager.
Work with every student for a full calendar year.
Yeah.
And if they don't do their homework, that's okay. You just go through everything with them in the lesson, and you sit down and give them drills. So the tutor is sitting there doing nothing while the student is taking practice problems. I try to do it very efficiently. That's why I give typically a full test every week. And then we go over the wrong answers because that's more efficient than going over cold tests every single week.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. I remember you told me that. I forgot. That's a good reminder. Julie wants to know, I think this is about the Tufts kid. Did she require remedial math tutoring to get that 31? I don't think she did, right?
Math was her weakest score. I don't know if I would say it's remedial math tutoring, but she did have a lot of gaps in the math that we did work on content-wise. That's a good question because certainly if someone has a lot of gaps in their math knowledge, that will take longer to learn because while the reading and science are almost 100% strategy-based, the grammar and math are content-based, and that takes some more work to come up to speed.
Okay. All right. Next question, Lawrence. I thought that taking the SAT more than 2 or 3 times was not recommended. Is it different with the ACT? And which one do you recommend taking, SAT or ACT? So there's a few questions there. So the first one, not recommended to take the SAT more than 2 or 3 times. I have not heard that.
I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, from students, but I hear a lot of weird rumors. Like my favorite was that they heard that the best place to take the ACT was Pennsylvania because the curve was somehow better there. I don't know what that says about their opinion of Pennsylvanians, but
is there a state curve?
No.
Okay. Okay.
It's not even a curve. They figure out their quote curve before the test is even given. So you're not judged against your peers.
And same thing for the ACT. There's no listen, if the only thing that this might be indirectly embodying in terms of a question is there's a tiny handful of schools that want to see every test you ever took. Like MIT, I think is one of them. Georgetown might be another one off the top of my head. But they're looking for an anomaly. Like if you were in the mid 20s or low 20s and all of a sudden you popped to 34 out of, one time out of 5, that is unusual. But if you were, 24, 28, 29, and you showed, some type of progression or more or less a progression, that's fine because that's what kids do in college. You get a bunch of material, then you perform on it. So it's usually kind of overblown, that fear.
So it would harm your application if you had like a bunch of 25s and then a 34?
Well, I think just the same way. Well, just the same way you've told me before about some of your kids who had a huge increase, and then the ACT board investigated them. In one case, disallowed it. That's what I think the admissions officers are looking for, is maybe not something shady, but it could be just a fluke. They're trying to eliminate the fluke. Okay,
that makes sense.
All right. Next question, Rochelle. Do they really need to take the writing section of the ACT? Does anyone read it? You do have to take it if you're applying to one of the, I think, 30 or 40 schools. It might be less now. It might be 20 or 30 that require it. But they, like we said before, it's really minimal in terms of emphasis. Julie, do you teach to be better test taker strategies or teaching content through practice exams?
I get this question a lot, and the answer is yes, both of them. I mean, you can't do one or the other. I have heard of test prep companies focusing on the content. I think that is a terrible way to go. The tests are very, very heavily influenced by strategy. Contrary,
well, you can spend more time teaching if you're overloading the content, right? And more hours.
True. Yeah, they get into the minutia of all these math rules and grammar rules, things that you don't need to know at all to take the test. I'm a minimalist when it comes to teaching. That doesn't mean we're skipping anything. We learn everything you need to know, but that's it. So that might mean we're using sort of simplified grammar and math rules, but that's okay because they're not testing a lot of advanced concepts. I forgot what I was saying before now.
Well, sometimes kids have questions about it, but I mean, it's, again, the philosophy is highest, best results in the least amount of time. I think that's
but strategy is really, really important. But what I was saying before is the test companies, the College Board and the ACT, don't want you to think that you need strategy. So because then that would imply that their tests aren't fair, but they're not, and you do need strategy. So
There's a lot about these tests that's unfair, including if you pay for tutoring. I mean, let's face it. But depending on what schools you're applying to, you're competing with a lot of kids. Virtually all of them are doing some sort of paid test prep. All right, Gail. We've heard from some schools that if you take the ACT, they do not ask for SAT 2 tests or subject tests in math or science. That is true for a limited number of usually sort of more competitive schools, the ones that want the subject tests. Yeah, it changes every year too. So it's one of these things where you have to look it up. But that can be true. It's just certain schools.
But I wouldn't let that influence my decision. If you feel you're better suited to the SAT, then I still think it's worth going with that.
Right, and if you have a high ACT, I would still take the SAT subject test just because you're not sure what schools are going to have this policy and where you're going to get in. Okay, all right. Julie says you need a letter from a doctor to get more time, meaning extended time. Yeah, of course you do. Right. Let's see. Lawrence had something to add on that. Julie wanted to know about whether the Tufts admit took private tutoring. Yeah, the answer is yes. P.T. Barnum would be proud. Funny. Julie, have you ever had a student that first scored 1125? I don't think you can score 1125.
No.
And reach 1500. If so, what does that take in terms of prep? So let me take a stab at answering that. I think the question is really, if you start really low, can you get huge increases? And I'll give my answer, and then Marissa, you can give the real answer. But my answer is a lot of times the starting point is either, if you're at one of these big test prep companies, it's artificially low because they don't use actual tests the way that we do. They have their own versions that are designed to be super hard, and therefore they can show improvement and deliver on their promise. So that's one area where I've heard of a lot of huge test score increases. But I think in general, when kids take the PSAT for the first time in 10th or 11th grade, they almost never prepare for it. So they have a really low score. And from that time forward, I think it's very common to see, kids go up 500 points or whatever the math is on your example till they hit their top score in the SAT, or go up, 5 or 6 points on the ACT. But it does take more time with some kids and less time with others. So how would you answer that?
I mean, that's a huge increase, especially going into 1500s.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible. I've had people that have huge increases. One of our students, I think she started on the ACT at like a 21 or 22. And then I think you know who I'm talking about. Over the summer, we had her in the class. She got, I want to say 32 or 31 or 33.
Yeah, Mary, right?
Yeah, I forgot where her end, but that's a tremendous increase. And that's enough to trigger an investigation into cheating because it's so unlikely to happen. But I have
by the way, she was all classes, not tutoring. And she took, I was smoking a cigar today with her dad's, one of her dad's buddies who we golfed together. And she was doing better in the practice test with you, right? But she kind of clenched up on the actual tests.
Yeah. She's still on the real test. It ended up doing better than her highest practice test, but her practice tests were like in the high 20s, I think.
Yeah.
And then
And
when
she-
she finally took it, it just went
Yeah.
up.
And in her case, and Julie, I'm not trying to say, or anyone, I'm not trying to say that, Marissa has some sort of magic wand or anything, but in this specific instance, Mary had taken another test prep course. I think she might have had tutoring. She'd taken the test a few. What's that?
I think she had private tutoring.
Yeah, and she took multiple times before she sat through your class over the summer.
Right.
And that's when she had her biggest, gain. So it's not necessarily that maybe she sat with you and something clicked, which I do see a lot. Sometimes there's this cumulative type thing. I think in your case, you helped her not only with the strategies, but also to calm her butt down.
Yeah, she was having a lot of anxiety over the test, and I really focused my efforts on being more of a cheerleader toward the end. It's hard to say what exactly did the trick.
But there's no one thing ever. That's my point.
Yeah, but I've seen huge increases over the years. It's certainly not a guarantee. I wouldn't say like, oh, you're starting at 1120 and I can definitely get you up to 1500. It really depends on the reasons why the score is lower. Everybody has their limits, but you're not confined by a certain increase just because you started at a certain point.
But you can usually, what I have seen you do is you usually after a few lessons or a few classes, you can get a feel for what a reasonable top end of a range should be in terms of a goal. Yeah. And then we know what we're looking for. And if the kid hits it or goes slightly over, they're done. So we don't, again, it's the maximum effort in the least amount of time. Mm-hmm. The text that we got today from Maddie's mom, right? She hit a 30 and I think super scored. She might be even at a 31, but she also started on the first practice test. I think she was in the low 20s.
Yeah. She took the test twice so far, and the last one I think was a 28. Her first test was a 28, but her initial score was like 21 or something.
Right.
She ended up with 30. So yeah, that's a 9-point increase from her first test that she did without prep.
She took a practice ACT, an actual one cold, and she had like a low 20s score, but then she had this increase. So anyway, again, of course I think you're great and all that, but it's not like you have a magic wand, and there's a lot of factors you can't control, like how hard kids work, how much effort they put in,
how much time they have.
Yep.
To actually do the work.
Yeah.
That's a big factor.
Yep. Okay, so what else we got here? Moving right along here. Again, any questions, pop them in here, and we got a few more minutes here, and then let me put the offer up. So we have these courses that are starting, an ACT and an SAT course. They start in January. So if you're watching this after the fact, we'll have other courses too. But this coupon code is for people who watch this webinar exclusively. You get $150 off, and the coupon code's right there. It's VIP 150. And if you're not sure which test you want to take, we are this Saturday at 9 o'clock. We're running a diagnostic. We still have about maybe 4 or 5 spots left to run it. And again, if you're watching this on replay, you'll just contact us about when the next one is. But it's a test in our office. Marissa put it together. We're not going to talk about potential copyright issues, but somehow she came up with half ACT, half SAT, and then she can kind of extrapolate, which one is better based on the exit interview and other, her other proprietary methods. The alternative is to take one full SAT on your own, and then one full ACT on your own, 7+ hours of testing. That's fine. That's probably arguably better, maybe not. But what Marissa did is she cut that time in half, and that diagnosis has seemed to serve us well. All right, let me get back to these questions. How do I do that? Okay, I'm going into my control panel. Julie, my kids as a 10th grader did 1130 on October PSAT. She needs a 1500 to get into a few of her dream schools. Yeah, I mean the October PSAT in 10th grade is almost not even worth considering. I don't think that's unreasonable to go from 1130 to less than 400 points from the 10th grade PSAT. Marissa, what do you think?
You can go up to 1600 on the scale, the PSAT. In
terms of right, but in terms of that wouldn't be so I mean, it'd be great, but it wouldn't be so.
It's a big
crazy.
improvement, but yeah, it's not like getting that 1150 on your junior year actual SAT and say like, okay,
After you study,
in a couple of months, I want to get a 1500.
Yeah,
that is typically an unreasonable expectation, but
right. But if you took it in 10th grade when you haven't had all the content, you didn't study, you took it cold, it's not crazy to go up 400 points at all. It's not, we're not promising it. I'm just saying that. Rochelle asks, my daughter got a 1320 on the PSAT and a 30 on the ACT. Are these comparable scores? Her weakness is math, super strong in reading. They'll sound like they're close, right? There's a,
you can look it up online. Just Google like SAT, ACT conversion, and they have concordance tables, and then another company, you can just type it in and see what the equivalent is. Off the top of my head, they do sound roughly equivalent.
Yeah. So if kids are roughly equivalent, then what do you recommend in terms of what they should focus on?
Which test do they prefer?
Got it. Only about that. If they're roughly equal, then just whatever they feel better about.
Yeah, I find that the students are usually pretty good at figuring out what test they'll do better on, just based on their own preference.
Good. All right, so we got a few more questions here in the lightning round. So if you have any questions, this is your chance to fire them away. Julie says it's easier to go from 21 to 28 than 28 to 35. Yeah, probably.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
It's in general, the closer you are to the middle of that bell curve, the easier it is to move.
Sure. Lawrence, if you take an SAT test during application time, do the schools check your new score when you rush it if you get it in by the deadline? Absolutely. But if you get it in after the deadline, they may or may not. They'll probably just go on the basis of what they've received before deadline. And then, it's kind of a even bet. All right, Suzanne, is it true that the PSAT has easier questions than the SAT? That they are 11th grade questions on the PSAT, I guess they could be 10th grade for the 10th grade PSAT, and 12th grade level questions on the SAT. Is that true?
I believe it is.
Yeah.
I think that they take out some of the harder questions, and I think that accounts for the lower scale. Like you cannot get a 1600 on a PSAT. And they're also shorter tests.
Yeah, and they're called. It's like there's a couple of letters before the PSAT, but there's a different one for 10th grade than 11th grade, and that's just because of that, because of the level of difficulty.
Yeah.
Okay, Rochelle. Looks like the last question here, so we're going to go final call for questions. How do the strategies differ between ACT and SAT? Okay, so we kind of danced around that one, but that's a very good question.
I mean, they're actually somewhat similar, but since the ACT is so much faster, the strategy on the ACT is much more about time management than the SAT is. So,
now, before the SAT changed formats a couple of years ago, would your answer have been different?
I mean, my strategy was different because the test is structured very differently, but the ACT was still much more faster paced.
Okay. Because now the SAT, because it was losing market share to the ACT, I guess it's almost 2 years now. I don't remember exactly. They became more ACT-like.
I think it might be 3 years now.
Time flies in test prep. It's like nuts. Yeah. It's hard to keep up. Okay. All right, good. So I don't see any more questions. If anyone has, again, any questions about which test is best, or they want to talk to you directly in terms of just hearing a little bit more about how you do stuff, and by the way, you do a lot of Skype for our clients who are out of the state and out of the country. I want to
sometimes my Skype students exceed my in-person students.
Yeah. Well, it's because we do all these webinars. I think. Is the email that you use, is it Uneberg at Gmail?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to post that right here at chat. If anyone has any questions, that is her email. And hopefully you found this helpful. Last call, going once, going twice, and sold. We're done. All right. So thanks a lot for spending this time with us pre-holidays. Have a happy holiday, everyone. We're planning on doing these regularly, monthly, just to help you stay on top of everything. What about? Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing. I meant to ask you about this. I'm just looking at my sticky here with my notes. The for New York folks, if they haven't heard,
Oh yeah, big
February
news.
is a big month, right?
Yeah,
Remember how happy you were?
I'm very happy. Our governor, Andrew Cuomo, signed into law the bill that, basically, long story, is enabling the ACT to offer a February test in New York State. So we no longer have to travel to New Jersey and Connecticut to take this test. However, I don't know how many testing centers are still left open. So if that's something that you're interested in signing up for, do that right now before they fill up.
And that's
But
at act.org.
I believe so. But the summer test is still not available in New York,
As of now.
probably forever.
Really?
This is
That's a bold prediction, Marissa.
the reasoning why they didn't have the February test in the first place is New York has a law that requires standardized tests to like release their materials, and they didn't want to release all of their tests. Presumably, they want to recycle their questions in the future. So they still, if they had given the July, I think it's in July, the July test in New York, that would mean that's another test that they would have to release, and they don't want to do that. So I don't foresee that happening, but I'll take February, because at least you don't have to travel out of state in potential snow.
Well,
I think July's easier.
Well, thanks for the bold prediction.
You're
Very gutsy. Do you have any stock market predictions, or are you just sticking to testing dates?
I will stick to the testing dates.
Good. Very smart. Okay. Well, even the experts are wrong half the time, so it doesn't matter.
That's true.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for participating tonight. And if you have any questions, just reach out. Signing off, Andy Lockwood and Marissa Uneberg from Lockwood Test Prep. Have a good night.
Night.